My name is Dan Montagnani, and I'm the CEO of Groundsure, the environmental and climate change analysis and insights business that's been providing services to the legal conveyancing market for the last 25 years. And I'm going to talk now just a little bit about data and information and contrast the idea and the concept of data and information with that of analysis and insights, and what that means for the property industry and conveyancing world, now in particular in the context of the debate around upfront information and the new regulations that we've recently seen coming forward from national trading standards. I'll probably start by considering our position at Groundsure as a business that's providing risk advice to clients in the course of a transaction, and what that really means. And at its best, we consider the risks associated with a property transaction, and we come back and we give a property a clean bill of health, and everybody's happy and everyone gets on with their part of the process, and that's great. But on a bad day, of course, we might come back and say, well, we've identified some risks, or we've identified some risks in the future that may affect this property as a result of climate change. And immediately on doing so, we have given the parties involved in the transaction, in particular the buyer, because that's ordinarily where our service sits, a headache to some degree. And how big that headache is depends on, of course, the magnitude of the risk that we've identified. But I believe that as a business that provides a service like that, it's hugely important that we go back to customers and we advise them of the next steps and what the options are available to them to manage and to mitigate that risk. And of course, in 99% of cases, these issues are manageable. They do have remedy, and we are able to help people realize those remedies in order to get the transaction back online. And of course, we don't want to be a business that is frustrating transactions and causing delay and frustration. We want to be a business that supports transactions and helps those transactions take place in a positive light, in a transparent light, where all parties can understand what the risks are and agree a mutually acceptable way forward in order to progress things. And that's really the purpose of our business, and always what we're trying to do. And I personally remind all of our people regularly that that is what our purpose is. Just identifying problems and giving reports to people identifying problems is not good enough. And so with that lens, I turn my attention to data and information and the current debates we're having about upfront information and the virtues of that. And my starting position there is upfront information is undoubtedly a good thing. It's undoubtedly a great thing to have greater transparency in a transaction, for everybody to be aware, all parties to be aware and alert to what the issues with a property may be. And then for the next steps beyond that to be, well, if we've identified some problems or there's some issues here, then how do we agree the way forward? How can we agree on what the mitigation is, who's going to pay for that, how that works across the transaction, how the buyer is satisfied, how the buyer's lender is satisfied at how we're addressing those issues. And I suppose for me, I would sort of go towards the point around data and information and just start with, well, look, there's lots of data and there's lots of information, and lots of that information is freely available from different sources online and elsewhere. But often it has highly variable quality. Often that data can have gaps, or the way that data is presented suggests it doesn't have gaps when actually it does. And sometimes we can have data that has suggests a contrasting situation to another set of data. And the final part of this is, of course, that data is open to interpretation, and data alone is very open to interpretation. And that if that interpretation is taking place in quite a subjective way, in the mind of a buyer, perhaps, or the buyer's solicitor, and actually there isn't any context to the information, there are no details around how that information or data was generated or where it came from, the provenance of that data, then we end up with a situation where we can have quite a wide range of views about what that data means. And there for me is the issue and the difference between data and insights and analysis. And whilst I feel there's a difference there, I do see the industry talking a lot about data, and actually what they mean is actually the analysis of that data. But we don't talk about the analysis bit, we talk about the data. And therefore, I think we do need to introduce that to the conversation, because whilst we're in this period of implementation of upfront information, if we want to genuinely reduce the timescale for transactions to take place, if we genuinely want to reduce the fall through rate by providing upfront information, we do need to think hard, long and hard, about what it is that's being provided upfront, and whether indeed that is just data that's collected from somewhere, or whether in fact that is insights and analysis of data that's available to give a professional and balanced, pragmatic view of what a particular risk may be associated with that property. And for me, I do see this conversation and dialogue around information and data and the confusion of that with analysis and insights. And data may be freely available, information might be scrapable from the internet or wherever, and be provided at very low cost or no cost at all, and that's wonderful. But data alone can cause more problems than it solves. Without the expert analysis and interpretation of that data and what it means, its significance of it in the context of the transaction, I fear can or could lead to situations where the provision of this information upfront could actually frustrate transactions and cause delays, where perhaps on the buy side, where searches are being undertaken in the normal way, there are perhaps contradictory outcomes and contradictory views about what particular risks may be. And that, I'm afraid, is the difference between data and information and analysis and insights.
So what do I mean by the difference between data and analysis? And I suppose just to bring that to life, this analysis piece, what's actually involved there? Well, I guess there's even a stage before the analysis, the aggregation of data, and often this data is not freely available or online or available to download from the internet. So there are specific data sets that we, for example, Groundsure, use in the course of our analysis that we pay for. And that data, of course, has been subject to various QA processes, data processing, and we will take data like that and potentially further treat the data. And we may have scenarios, for example, where we're using multiple data sets to tell us something, and therefore we have to look at the logic in terms of bringing those data sets together. And by doing that, we end up with a new layer of data. And so that's part of the data treatment, data processing that's going on in the background, that's driving certainly Groundsure environmental searches. And it's important to understand that this isn't just, we've just pulled some data together and the summary of that is here you go. So the processing of that data, the assimilation and treatment of data, the smoothing of data. I mean, a good example of this, for example, is where we have flood risk information, and we might have flood defences. And actually some flood risk data may not take account of flood defences. And I know we've done some work around, quite a lot of work around that, to make sure that when we pull those two things together, that we end up with a set of data that is logical and makes good sense, i.e. we're in a flood risk area, but we know that we have a defended flood because there's engineering infrastructure here that's defending that flood, and therefore it would be silly of us to just point out this is a flood risk area without thinking about the concept of there are flood defences here. So that's kind of a really good example. And I suppose finally, as part of the analysis, we're also subjecting data to quite a rigorous QA process. And so in Groundsure, we have something called the Data Governance Council. And that's our ultimate sort of QA check on any data and any analysis, any algorithm that we bring to a product. Before we release that, it's scrutinized to a very, very high degree. And that's part of what we're doing in terms of producing the products that we then bring to market. And so I contrast that with how the industry is currently talking about upfront information, upfront data. And so just the data on its own misses all of those important steps that I've just mentioned there. And so it's important to draw that distinction. Look, data on its own may be appropriate in certain circumstances, but we mustn't conflate the principle and the concept of pure data, its first principle form, with the principle of analysis. And what's gone into that analysis and the thinking and the logic behind that gives us an answer rather than just purely a data point.
And we're working hard with partners across the industry to look at this and to take it forward. But I do feel that there needs to be a bit of a stop and recognition moment where we all begin to understand the difference between data and analysis, which are two very, very different things. So I'll bring my talk to a close there. I hope that's been insightful, and I look forward to seeing and speaking to many of you across National Conveyancing Week. Thank you.